We continue now at the top of Daf Gimel Amud Aleph Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 3a. The Gemara here is continuing to explain why it's different by a case of someone on a roof able to see into a chotzer. There we certainly would say there's going to be a problem of hezek re'iyah. Again, the idea is di'tzdana minach. The idea is that I don't know when I'm in the courtyard, which I use all the time, I don't know when you'll be on the roof, so I can't really hide from you properly, and that's why in that case, hezek re'iyah certainly is shmei hezek and is not a proof to our general question within a chotzer. And Rashi explains, di'tzdana minach divrei hatznei. Again, I'll act privately because I know you're there, but the point is I don't know when you're going to be there when it comes to a roof. Aval chotzer hachalukah letarvayu. But if you, let's say, have a courtyard divided among two people, so kviyat hashmishtei l'chol echad bechelko kol shah, everybody's using their chotzer all the time. V'lo avdi ba mili ditzina, people aren't doing things that are private in such a situation, and that's why it could be different in that situation. And the Gemara continues, Lishna Achrina Amrila. There's a different version of the discussion on Daf Beis Amud Beis. Essentially, this entire discussion is the same as the discussion on Beis Amud Beis, but just in the opposite direction. That Savrua, that initially we think, Mai Mechitza Plugsa. What does the word Mechitza in the Mishnah mean? Again, the opposite of what we thought before. We don't think it means wall in this version, but we think it means Plugsa. It just means that they want to divide. Techsiv, as it's written in the Pasuk, Vati Mechza So'eda, again talking about division over there. And so then we would understand, once they want to divide, then we force them to build a wall. Alma hezek re'iyah, shmei hezek. So you see from that hezek re'iyah is considered to be damaged, and the Gemara says, no, it could be that what mechitza means, it means a wall, and it's only when they want to build a wall that they build a wall. Where do we see that mechitza means a wall? The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, mechitza sakerem shenifritza, if you have the wall of a vineyard, so there the word mechitza means wall, the wall of a vineyard that breaks, omer lo gedor, and then he tells him to put up the owner of the, again, you have a situation here where the wall is between a vineyard and a field of grain. The owner of the field of grain tells the owner of the vineyard to fix the fence. Nifritza, it breaks again. Omer lo gedor, he tells him to fix the fence. Nisiyayish hemen v'lo gadra, if he then gives up and doesn't fix it, harei zeh kiddush, so then you're going to have a problem of kilayim, v'chayev b'achriyusa, and he's going to be chayev in any damage that occurs because now the grain is going to be aser b'hana. And the point is, v'taima d'ratzon. Now, if you're going to say that mechitza means wall, as we see in this brayso, so it's only because they want to build the wall that they have to. Halo ratzon, but if they don't want to, if they don't agree, ein mechayveno, so we would not obligate him to build a wall. So alma hezek re'iyah, lav shmei hezek. Then you see the opposite, that hezek re'iyah is not considered to be hezek, it's not considered to be damage. But the Gemara then says, if so, bonin esakosel, if the word mechitza means wall, so why does it say bonin esakosel? It should say bonin osomi boile. It should say they build it, because we already mentioned the wall. So elamai, but then the Gemara says, so what are you going to say? Pluksa, you're going to say that the word mechitza just means division. If that's the case, why is it that they want to make a mechitza? It should be sheratzu lachzos mi boile. It should be that they want to divide. That would be the proper way to phrase it. And the Gemara says to that, no, it's kidamri inchi. It's like people speak. They'll say ton navid pluksa. Come, let's make a division. So you could phrase it in that manner. But the Gemara continues, v'i hezek re'iyah shmei hezek. If you're going to say that hezek re'iyah is considered to be damage, so ma'ir yaratzu. So if you're saying again that mechitza means to make a division, but why do they have to want to make a division? Afilu lo ratzu nami. Even if they don't want to, even if they don't both agree, but still one person can force the other because of hezek re'iyah. And the Gemara says to that, Amar Rabasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabasi says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Mishnah seinu kishein badin chaluka. The case of our Mishnah is that it's actually not large enough that they can force each other to divide it into two chatzeros, into two separate chatzers. Really, it's small enough that no one can force a division here, and so therefore, v'hu deratzu, therefore it's only true if they agree. If they agree, they're going to divide it, so then we say hezek re'iyah shmei hezek, and they need to build a wall. But the Gemara says, "My kamash malan." But if that's the case, what exactly is the Mishnah teaching us? Techi lesbei din chaluka. That if, let's say, it's small, it's so small that you don't have to divide it. Ki ratzu pligi. But if they want to, then they do divide it. But tanina, that we already learned in the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, "Eimasai." When is this true? Bisman she'in shneim rotzim. When they don't both agree. Avol bisman shneim rotzim. But if they both agree, afilu pachos mikan cholkan. Even if it's smaller than the amount that's usually division, still we do say they divide it. So we already learned this in a Mishnah later on. And the Gemara says, "He may hasam enough." We only had over there hava amino afilu pachas mikan b'mesipas bialma. I would say that if it's a small amount of space, so then they're just going to use a mesipas bialma, just a mere partition. Kamash malan hacha kosel. That's why it comes to teach us over here in our Mishnah that they're actually building a wall. But the Gemara continues, "V'lisni ha v'lo lisni hach." Well, why not just have this Mishnah over here, our first Mishnah, and not have that later Mishnah? Because this Mishnah essentially is teaching that same idea that if it's a small amount of space, but they want to divide it, so then they do divide it and they use a wall. And the Gemara says to that, Sefer Tzrichale, no, we need the end of that later Mishnah. It says, V'chisvei HaKodesh, when it comes to Kisvei HaKodesh, let's say Sefer Torah, or Sefer Nevi'im, or Sefer Ksuvim, so there, Afal Pi Sheshneim Rotzim, even if they both want to divide, Lo Yachloku, they don't divide in that situation. And Rashi explains, She'ein Bodin Chalukah, that it's not big enough that one can force the other to divide. That means Ches Amos, that if it's not 8 Amos, Lo Yachloku, again, you can't force to divide in that case. That's why it has to be specifically Rotzu, where they agree. And then the Gemara said, Uvechisvei HaKodesh, when it comes to Kisvei HaKodesh, meaning Sefer Torah, Shu B'krach Echad, let's say you have a Sefer Torah in one scroll, V'chein Nevi'im Uksuvim HaKsuvim Begilyon K'Sefer Torah, or if you have Nevi'im and Ksuvim that are also written in a scroll like a Sefer Torah, again, the Mishnah over there says they don't divide it. And some do take out this parentheses, but we will read through it. Lishna Achrina, another version, V'chi Ratzu Ma'havi, even if they are Ratzu, even if they do agree, what difference does that make? Lahadrbe, can't they retract what they initially agreed to? Amar Ravasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ravasi says that Rabbi Yochanan says, B'shakanu miyado. We're talking where they not only agreed, but they made a kinyan in order to essentially say that this is binding. But the Gemara still says, instead of our Mishnah talking about a case of a small chutzner, which is so small that you can't force a division, and therefore it's talking where they agreed to the division, why not talk about a larger chutzner, which you could force a division, and then it could simply be a case where they didn't both agree, but one could force the other to divide the chutzner. And the Gemara says to that, if that was the case, that it was yesh badin chaluka, when they can divide the chutzner even though they both did not agree, even though only one of them wants it, then I would have thought, if it's a very small chutzner, then even if they agree, you don't necessarily divide it. So that's what it's teaching us, that if it's small but they agree, you do divide it. But the Gemara still says, but could you have even thought that if it's small and they agree, you don't divide it? But we said at the end, the Mishnah later, when is it true? If they both don't agree. But if they both agree, then you do divide it, even if it's small. And my lav akosel, doesn't that mean you divide it with a wall? The Gemara says, no, I'm a sipas bialma. It could be that the Mishnah later was just talking about a partition. And so the Gemara says, well, lisni high, velo lisni high. Well, again, why not just have our first Mishnah and not the later Mishnah? And the Gemara says, it's the same as before, Sefer Tzrichale, we need the end of that Mishnah where it says, Uvechisvei HaKodesh, that by Kisvei HaKodesh, Afal Pi Sheshneim Rotzim Lo Yachlok, even though they both want, still they don't divide it. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, similar to the above parentheses, B'mayu Kimta L'masnisin B'she'ein Bodin Chaluka. How can you say the Mishnah is talking where it's so small that you can't force a division? I B'she'ein Bodin Chaluka Ki Ratzu Ma'hav. If it's Ein Bodin Chaluka, but they agree, who cares? Nahadru B'hu, again, why can't they just retract? Amar Ravasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ravasi says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Shekanu miyadan, that they made this kinyan that essentially made it a binding agreement. But the Gemara says, V'chikanu miyadan ma'hav, but even if they made a kinyan devarim bi'almahu, isn't that just kinyan devarim? It's like a kinyan of mere words, just an agreement. Why can't they retract? And the Gemara says to that, B'shekanu miyadan baruchos. We're talking about where they made a kinyan in certain sides of the chutzner, that already is binding. Ravashi, Amar Ravashi says, Kagon sheholach zeh b'soch shelo v'hechzik. The cases where this one walked in his part and he made a kinyan chazaka, v'zeh b'soch shelo v'hechzik, and this one went in his part and he made a kinyan chazaka, and so that is a true division with a kinyan, and you cannot retract. And Rashi explains kinyan devarim, who it's just a kinyan on mere words. Ve'in chalipin konin, a kinyan chalipin doesn't work. Ela davar hanikna, only on something, on an object that can be acquired. O mecher, o matana, either it could be a sale or a gift. O shibud karkos, or it could be a lien on property. Sha kinyan chal olav, where the kinyan is chal on that. O metaltlin, or it could be metaltlin, movable objects. But it can't just simply be on an arrangement like this. And the Gemara says baruchos, we're talking where they take different sides, meaning zeb borer lo chelik mizrachi. This one says I have the east side of the courtyard. V'zeb borer lo chelik ma'aravi. This one says I have the west side of the courtyard, v'kanu miyadim, and then they make the formal acquisition. U'me'ata nikne chelik mizrachi lazeh ve'in lazeh chelik bo. Now this person has the eastern side and the other person has no portion in that. V'chein hasheni lechaver, the same is true on the other side for the second person. And then the Gemara said v'hichzik, the cases where they actually made a kinyan chazaka each on their side. V'chelko rafak be'por, so they dug a little bit on their side. V'karka nikne b'chazaka acharei asher ratzu b'shas chaluk, and karka is acquired through a kinyan chazaka once they agreed to divide. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Mokom shenoagu livnos v'chulu, places have different customs in terms of what kind of stones to use for walls. And the Gemara explains, Gevil avne de lo mishpia. Gevil refers to stones that are not chiseled. Gozis avne de mishpia, and gozis refers to stones that are chiseled. Dechsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, Kol eila avonim yikaros kemidos gozis. That's what it says in the pasuk. The pasuk goes on to say that we're talking about cut stones. And the Gemara continues, Kefisin Archi, Kefisin refer to half bricks, Levain and Livni, Levain refer to regular bricks. Amar le Rabba Berei de Rava Rav Ashi. Rabba the son of Rava said to Rav Ashi, Mimai de Gavil Avne de lo Mishpia Ninhu, V'hai Tefach Yisera Lamorsha de Karnasa. How do you know that Gavil are stones that are not chiseled? And the reason it's an extra tefach, the reason that the stone is a tefach wider, a tefach thicker, is because of the fact that the edges have not been cut, they haven't been chiseled. Dilma Palga de Gazis, maybe what Gavil actually is it's a brick or a stone that's half the size of a gazis. And so why is the wall thicker? V'hai Tefach Yisera, the extra tefach of a Gavil wall, Levene Urvehu, that's between the rows. What they would actually do is have two rows and have mortar between them to attach them, and that tefach is the mortar in between. Maybe that's what's going on. Kidekamrin and Kfisin Archi Levain and Livni. That's exactly what we say by Kfisin and Levainim. We say that Kfisin are half bricks and Levainim are whole bricks. V'hai Tefach Yisera Levene Urve, and the extra tefach, that's for between the rows. And the Gemara continues, Amar Lei said to him, but according to your reasoning, Kefisin Archi Minol, and how do we know that Kefisin are half bricks? El Gemara Gemirila, obviously it's a tradition. Gavil Nami, when it comes to Gavil as well, Avne de lo Mishbia, Gemara Gemirila. The fact that it is stones that are not chiseled, that is a tradition. And the Gemara continues, Zika Diamri, there are those that say a different version of what we just said above. Amar Le Ravacha Breder Rav Avia Rav Ashi, Ravacha the son of Rav Avi said to Rav Ashi, Mimai Dahai Kefisin Archi Ninu, how do we know that the Kefisin are half bricks, V'hai Tefach Yisera Levene Orve, and that the extra tefach is between the rows with mortar? Dilma Mai Kefisin Avni de lo Mishbi, and maybe what Kefisin are is again it's stones that are not chiseled. V'hai Tefach Yisera Lamorsha de Karnas, and the extra tefach is for the edges that have not been cut away, again that it has been uncut, and that's why it's a little larger. Kidekamrin and Gavil Avne de lo Mishbi, like we say by Gavil, that those are stones that are not chiseled, they're not planed, and Gazis Avne de Mishbi, and Gazis are stones that are chiseled, they are planed. V'hai Tefach Yisera Lamorsha de Karnasa, and the extra tefach is because of the rough edges that you have when they don't chisel the stones. And the Gemara responds, Amar Lei said to him, but according to your reasoning, Gavil Avne de lo Mishbi and Manolan, how do you know that Gavil is stones that are not chiseled? El Gemara Gemiri La, obviously it's just a tradition. Hachanami here also, Gemara Gemiri La, it is a tradition, again when we're talking about the whole bricks and the half bricks. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, Shema mina called Beinei Urve Tefach. We see from this that anytime you have mortar between the rows, it's going to be one Tefach. But the Gemara says, Hani Mili Betina, that's only true if you're using mortar. Aval Berichsa, but if you're using gravel, essentially you have little stones in there as well. Boi Tvei, so then you need a little more space. V'ika Diamri, there are those that say a slightly different version, Hani Mili Berichsa. On the contrary, you need a Tefach when it's Richsa, when it's gravel. Aval Betina, but if it's just mortar, Lo Boi Kuli Hai, then you don't even need that much space. You don't even need a tefach. And the Gemara continues, L'meimra de vegazis de chol dalet amos gova, you have a pusya chamisha koi, ilo lo koi. Does this all mean to say that when you have gazis stones, so if it's a 4 amos height wall, because that was the case in the Mishnah, we were talking about walls of 4 amos high, so apparently it has to be 5 tfachim wide, and then it's able to be 4 amos high. But if it's not 5 tfachim wide, then apparently that's not wide enough, it's not thick enough, and the wall will not be able to stand. But that's problematic from what we see in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. In the first Beis HaMikdash, they had what was called the Amatraxin, which was the wall that separated between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodashim. And so the Gemara asks, well, Amatraxin, what about the Amatraxin? To have a Gavoa Tloset Amasa that was 30 Amosai, it was only 6 Tvachim wide, so you see just one extra Tefach, and suddenly it's able to go, instead of 4 Amos, it's already able to go 30 Amos, the Kam, it's able to stand. And the Gemara answers to that, Kevan Dika Tefach Yisera, once you have that extra Tefach, Koi, so it's actually able to go much at a much greater height, it doesn't necessarily match up that exactly the thickness has to be the height. If you have 6 Tvachim already, it can go much higher. And Rashi explains, L'meimer de vegazis kol dalet amos gova, you have a pussy hay Tvachim Koi, v'lo lo Koi. Does that mean to say again that by gazis stones, if it's 4 amos high, it needs to be 5 Tvachim thick? Kinetanan b'masisin, like we learned in the Mishnah, begazis, zen nosen Tvachim umechsa, v'zen nosen Tvachim umechsa. By gazis stones, each one gives 2.5 tefach. The Katani Seif, and it says at the end of the Mishnah, that it's a 4 amos high wall. Well, if so let's say you do this calculation, So let's say it's going to be 8 amos high. Tzarech yud tvachim rochav, then it would need to be 10 tvachim thick, but that's not true by the Amatraxin. The Amatraxin, the binyan Shlomo that was built by Shlomo, meaning the first Beis HaMikdash, the gazes have it. The point over here is the Amatraxin was also made with the same kind of stones, gazes stones, the chsiv avnei gazes, it says that right in the pasuk. It was 30 amos tall. But it was only an amma thick. That was a separation between the heichel and the kodesh kodashim. And the Gemara then answered the tefach yisera. Once you have that extra tefach of thickness, just that little extra thickness, you can make it much higher. It doesn't have to be proportional that for every 4 amos you need another 5 tvachim. That's not how it works. And the Gemara continues with a mikdash sheni, and in the second Beis HaMikdash, my time alo avid amatraxin. Why didn't they make an amatraxin? Meaning, why didn't they have a wall that separated between the kodesh and the kodesh kadashim the same way they did in the first Beis HaMikdash? And the Gemara answers to that, ki koi betlosin koi tfeilo koi, because you're able to build it. Let's say it's 6 tefach thick. It can go 30 amos high, but it can't go more than 30 amos high. And the point is, the second Beis HaMikdash, it was taller than the first Beis HaMikdash. That's why they couldn't use an amatraxin. They had to use curtains. The Gemara says, how do we know the second Beis HaMikdash was taller? Because it's written in the pasuk, Gadol yeh kavod habayis hazeh achron min harishon. It says that the honor of the second Beis HaMikdash is going to be greater than the first, and that means to say that it's going to be a bigger structure. It's going to be taller. Rav Shmuel, there's actually a machlokas Rav and Shmuel about how to understand this pasuk. V'amri lo Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. Some say it's a machlokas Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. Chad Amar bebinyan. One says that the pasuk actually is referring to the structure, like we said, it has to be bigger, or it's going to be bigger in the second Beis HaMikdash. However, V'chad Amar, one says that's not what it's referring to, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Gimel Amud Beis.